Okay, so we're going to talk about the governance on EOS, which is a very sort of precious topic for me personally, because I think that this entire blockchain revolution, if we're going to see it through and to see it bring some real value, it actually has to do with some degree of governance that is workable. And like a lot of you probably remember when Bitcoin was conceived, like in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, there was this message saying that on this and this day, the Federal Reserve printed this and this much like money out of thin air or something like that, something along those lines. So the entire, how to say, crypto anarchistic agenda that, that actually gave crypto its real momentum was something that people held so closely to their hearts that whenever this was challenged, whether that actually makes sense, it generated a lot of pushback. So on EOS, we ended up in a state where this particular problem has manifested in an extremely vivid way. And this is something that a lot of the people that are outside of the community, they're not even aware of the tensions that happened inside, like even between sort of the high-ranked officials of EOS. For example, initially when Ian Grigg was working for Block One and Dan Larimer, and these things progressed through like long discussions on many mediums, and a lot of things were experimented with. And we also partook in these discussions, very much challenging the too idealistic view, but at the same time we tried to work with something that doesn't just throw everything, you know, into the garbage can and say like, okay, let's just have a code as law, another Ethereum. Because we remember all the I want to say fuck-ups, but I'm not supposed to use bad words, but on Ethereum when we had the DAO or the parity, you know, all these lockups that happened because of sometimes bugs in code and sometimes because of genuine hack attempts, and when millions and millions of dollars were, actually hundreds of millions of dollars were lost. So since EOS has this smart contract layer that is very flexible, a lot of thought has gone into how to do it differently. And this is where it gets interesting. So this is kind of how I see the problem, how to move away from this, what I call the hippie pipe dream, where we just all want to make good for everyone, and we're so good, you know. But how do you do this? How do you do this in a way that, first of all, won't allow other people to game this system and to extract some personal benefits in a way that is like so toxic to everyone else that basically just sinks the ship? This is one thing. And another thing, how should it be done so it's not interventionist to a point where, you know, where again we have another replica of what we were working on until now, of the entire corporate sort of power grab and something that actually fueled the crypto revolution. So we don't want to replicate this system. So first problem that I think it got overlooked to a large extent, that EOS and actually every other blockchain also, if it wants to be successful, it actually is a global thing. So as a multinational, it's non-homogeneous, you can't really tell who's participating. There's multiple jurisdictions, legal systems, linguistics, cultures, whatever. So trying to rein this into any sort of like a narrow spectrum system, it is a pipe dream to me, like that's hence the title. So, well, basically I just said it, like if we try to govern this with a single body that knows right from wrong, there's no way this can happen. And this is something that is actually trying to be instated right now on EOS. I'll talk about this in a second. This single body, it might constitute like a point of failure, because if you pressure that body into doing whatever you think you want it to do, and it is outside the DPoS voting, which EOS relies upon, then things get really wonky. So the depots governance model, I already mentioned this a little bit, but the way it works, I mean, this is part of the previous slide, but the token holders actually tell who is going to represent their interests. And the block producers can alter the code, like to the point that they can actually change the system contract. If there's an, if they're agreed, that they can do that. So they can do really stupid shit if they agree it's a good idea. And they can sync it all down and make it go to, valuations going to zero. But the key thing is that they probably are smart enough, if they got here in the first place, to not try that. So they have the tools to authorize transactions, affect the code base, change everything they want. Most important decisions are going to require 2/3 plus 1, which is in case of 21, that's 15. Some decisions require 100%, depending on the severity of the changes. And so it's a profound responsibility, right? The integrity of the network is in their hands. So they're like the custodians. They have to be taken really seriously. And there is this thing called the EOS Constitution, and this is where it gets interesting. Because before the launch of EOS, there has been a draft or this concept of the Constitution that all the token holders have to abide to. When they join the ecosystem, actually the Constitution should tell them what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and so on. And this was a very lofty goal. Another thing that gets even more interesting here, that it did not specify the rule set. It was just a constitution kind of in the making. And so just shortly before the launch, it was drafted by one of the Block One's employees. It was Thomas Cox, I believe, who was mostly behind it. And then it was sort of publicized for debates, and people could somehow comment on it, edit it to some extent. And then it went into effect as a part of the system contract. So whatever transaction you sign, there is actually a Ricardian contract attached to it saying that you abide by the Constitution. And we're a few months down the line right now, and we can see that it is not easily enforceable. If anyone is in violation with the Constitution, since the Constitution contains some really vague statements. For example, that one should not initiate violence against another one. What does that mean on a blockchain? Like all of a sudden, you need a lot of authority in interpretation as to what to do with that. And it's not there. So this is where thing gets really loose and loses traction. And we argue that phrasing it in this way, actually, it's asking for trouble, because people are going to call us out on bullshit. Like Ethereum guys over there, like this is your deadly fuel to take us down, right? And another thing, it was not ratified by the token holders. So everybody who actually holds the token had never had a chance to vote on the Constitution. So this is why it's called the interim Constitution. So it's more like a good practice, we would say. Like if you're on EOS, you probably shouldn't rob other people or kill other people. I don't know how you kill people on blockchains, but you probably shouldn't do these things. And that's kind of what it looks like. And the body that is to actually take you through what's good and bad and to resolve these disputes is called ECAF, which is Core Arbitration Forum, EOS Core Arbitration Forum. So in the pre-launch phase of EOS development, ECAF was stated in the white paper as a body that would do that. And this is the place where you go to where your things go wrong. Like so you got robbed or something, you go to ECAF and you say, "Dear ECAF, like I lost my private key," and all that. And this is a really, really kind of a thin ice situation, because how is this different from a corporate sort of a body that will tell you on a blockchain what is right and what is wrong, and then tell the block producers what they should do with these verdicts? So there's a gigantic amount of tension within the EOS community as to how this should be resolved. And proposals are being drafted right now by some pretty serious people, including ourselves, I would hope. What's that? Oh, this guy. Yeah, of course. I mean, like, we're in this business for quite some time now. So interesting thing, it was not defined as to who exactly is ECAF. It was just a name of some EOS Core Arbitration Forum. But we didn't know who constituted it, like who gave it the mandate to exist. So it turned out that it was just spontaneously filled by volunteers that felt like, oh, it's a good idea, I'm going to be an arbitrator on EOS. I'm just going to tell like what is right and what is wrong. And since it does have some sort of structure at this point, the block producers, for the lack of better solution, they sometimes listen to what ECAF says, because it's all kind of in a good faith arrangement. For example, if I come and say like I've got stolen from big time and $100 million were hacked from my account and they're still not cashed in on some exchange, which is pretty hard to believe, then ECAF can actually order the block producers to freeze the account that contains that stolen funds. And it has been effective to some extent in certain situations. That I'm not going to go into that too deeply, but according to our own research, ECAF is really backlogged with small cases of theft, lost keys, and it's not possible to scale this. Because you can imagine, this is a global network. These cases come from all over the world. And what can a bunch of, I don't know, 15 people sift through, take all the evidence and say, okay, this actually looks like this guy has stolen from this guy, but this guy, I think he's lying, like, don't listen to him. Like, this is, like, in our eyes, this is crazy, and we shouldn't go there, but here we go. So ECAF takes several weeks to deal with a case. Like, if you steal something from someone on a blockchain, especially an instantaneous one that has like half a second transaction times, it probably, if you practice this, I think it takes you 15 seconds to cash out, basically. You're out of the system. That's all it is. So ECAF's gonna deliberate on something that has happened a month ago and the guy is gone. So, you know, this just doesn't add up. So good intentions and these lofty visions, it does not have traction. And in good governance, this is kind of what we are seeking: the performance, the transparency, the collaborative potential. That all adds to good governance. Everything else we see as this kind of South Park hippie festival right here. So what kind of governance are we looking for? And this is another thing that we've really dived deep into. I think the two things got confused here. One is the governance of the network itself. So how do you make sure that there is integrity in the network, that it's safe, that it doesn't get derailed by some weird DDoS attacks and all these things? Or, for example, like some accounts get hacked in a way, for, I don't know, that there is this account that gathers the 4% of the inflation. Like, what if something was to happen to that? So there is this kind of governance. But there's also another type of governance that I think got confused along the way with this, where we talk about making things right for people that were just, I don't know, careless, sloppy, weren't too experienced with crypto, lost their keys, got robbed, got phished, whatever. And this is what I actually don't believe that this is called blockchain governance. This is a misnomer. So the one we're looking for is one that is not prone to corruption or self-appointed at any time. So self-appointed is what we consider ECAF to be right now. There were just a bunch of very eager people to jump up on stage and say, okay, I'm gonna be the arbitrator. And they're acting in their best intentions. We agree with that. There's no two words about it, but this thing, it cannot scale. Like, over the next 10 years, this would so deteriorate, in our view, at least my personal view. So another thing, the governance that we're looking for, it leaves freedom for users to select their jurisdictions. Because you can't have everything in the jurisdiction that you're familiar with and expect like the people from Southeast Asia to actually subscribe to this. There's no way for this to ever happen. The next thing is the one that invites big businesses and lets them shape their way of doing things. Because we want traffic, we want the token to be used, we want the token to be as valuable as possible. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And the last thing is scalable and cheap and hands-free. There cannot be a committee that has to sit through cases one by one and say, okay, this is really confusing. Oh, and this is in Chinese. Can we have someone translate it? Like, this doesn't work on a blockchain. This again is a pipe dream. So this here is going to be an explanation what an arbitrated money transfer looks like in a model that we're proposing that actually allows you to use this sort of a governance that is non-interventionist and that is also free market. And this is a bit of a leap right now from the previous bit, so let me elaborate a little bit here. We think that it is possible to create these walled gardens on smart contract platforms. And it's not just EOS. I believe this has been happening also on Ethereum with smart contracts to some extent, where you silo off a certain portion of the blockchain and govern it in a way that you see fit. And you offer that as a business, so the businesses can use it like other businesses, in this case your clients. So they can use it as an added value solution that protects them from all kinds of mishaps that would happen on a blockchain. So I'm gonna like show you real quick. This is part of this is a fictional UI where we do a transfer from Bob to Alice as per usual, and we select an arbitrator. So we select a company called Materium, which is actually an arbitrator on Ethereum. So we can see that the transfer happened 100 EOS for a smartphone that we're buying was transferred from Bob to Alice, and it has an arbitrator that is named Materium. But what actually happens underneath? And this is where it connects to the governance that I was talking about. What is the governance that Materium Limited as an arbitrator, as our sort of source of recourse? Like if things go wrong, we go to them and say like, look, this guy didn't like pay me, or the smartphone was actually a brick or something. Like, how can we do this? So, okay, I'll explain that in just a second. But this mode of tying the arbitration, it opens up EOS to competition. As opposed to the centralized ECAF, it actually lets people build these businesses and promote them in a way that they see fit and offer the value that is needed. It can also be used for theft protection, surprisingly enough. This is also a little bit of an internal argument, so for a lot of you this might be a little bit foreign, but the theft protection on EOS was like a big selling point of ECAF, that we're going to protect you from theft. And not only did that fail because ECAF was too small to act, but it also introduced a lot of this PR fallout that we have a controlled blockchain that someone is running to their to whatever vision they have. Another thing is allows the users the level of protection that they see for their particular transaction. So how would that work? So over here we see three actors. There's Alice that is selling Bob a smartphone for 100 EOS. And we have this commercial arbitrator walled garden that is actually the source of the governance over this particular transaction. So here is how it would work. Bob sends the money not to Alice, but to this commercial arbitrator walled garden contract. This is a smart contract. This money gets staked on the edge of this contract and is then translated into another token inside it. This another token is under the jurisdiction of the arbitrator. So all of a sudden we have a one-to-one peg between the 100 EOS that is staked here and the 100 arbitrated EOS to Alice, over which this particular entity has control over. So when that happens, this entity, that could be anybody, actually this could be a big business. The polygon that you're seeing, that could be Deloitte's, that could be Materium, that could be IBM offering big sort of legal support for doing transactions in crypto. So they act as a sort of a multi-sig escrow in this case. They will send Alice a message that 100 EOS is here. she knows it's there because she actually trusts Deloitte or whoever else. So she'll send Bob the smartphone. Now Bob also is part of the transaction. The smartphone is actually okay. So now what happens, and this is the important part, this thing disappears, gets burned, and this money becomes Alice's and is handed back over to her. And this might seem like a very simple concept, but this business logic inside the Polygon can be actually very complicated. You can use all kinds of services and offer it in such a way. And the trick here is that you need to issue a different token than EOS over which the arbitrator has multi-sig control over. So he does not have to interfere with BPs, block producers that is, to sort of do something about a transaction if it goes wrong, because this is what's happening right now. ECAF is basically calling the block producers saying, oh, you guys, you need to like reverse this transaction. Of course, you can't reverse transactions on the blockchain, but append a one that would take it back. But over here, as long as everybody is operating at a one-to-one pegged token inside that contract, then there is no problem. The BPs have nothing to do with that because the multi-sig nature of this arrangement means that, for example, if Alice and the arbitrator sign the multi-sig transaction, that everything is fine, and even if Bob is wrong, he actually submitted himself to the commercial arbitrator's verdict. Like, this is how people do it. I want to make a deal with you, but I want her to be the arbitrator. So if it goes wrong, like, she actually has a say how it's going to go. And this is what we are proposing, that this is the actual blockchain governance that we need. And we needn't mix it up with pestering block producers to do stupid shit, endangering the entire ecosystem and making like a point of failure in it. Another thing, and this has been brought up a lot, like, how does this affect a thief? Like, you have a theft. If you're stolen from, then you're actually not part of any deal. But this is where education comes in. Alice needs to know if she's sloppy with handling crypto and she's posting her private key everywhere on the net, like wherever she wakes up, she just posts her private keys, and like, that happens to some people. I don't know. I haven't met one yet, but I read on Telegram, on EOS Telegram, that does happen. So what happens then is Alice actually puts her money under that arbitrator's or walled garden custody. And it becomes this also 100 EOS, which is also pegged one-to-one with real EOS, but it's in ARB's custody, so it's actually unmovable outside the contract. It's not even compatible because it's not real EOS. It's a colored token, so to speak. So suppose the thief actually does steal Alice's private key. What happens next? Of course, he attempts to take the funds. Again, the message is issued. This is boring, you guys. I mean, it's really not that complicated. It's a two-factor authentication, but it's issued from the vault's multi-sig contract custodian, the commercial business, that will simply ring her up on her phone and say, like, your funds are about to be taken. Are you okay with that? Did you do that? Did you do that transfer? Well, Alice responds accordingly. Of course, the transaction is stopped right there. And because EOS has very cool features to protect your accounts from stealing from you directly, for example, there's a distinction between the owner and the active key. The owner key, you should always keep in a safe and never show it to anyone. The active key is used for signing everyday transactions. But if your active key gets compromised, you can revoke it with the owner key. Take your owner key out of the safe, use it just once, and the active key becomes void. So it will no longer be usable in any way. So now Alice knows that she should probably do that, and it's in the interest of that business to talk her through how to do this. And this is the kind of custodianship we're looking for in crypto, where people still are free to do whatever the hell they want and to choose their jurisdiction and to choose their business model and whatever else they want to do. So they don't have to put up with the tyranny of anybody and can just cross all over the world, but still be protected to the point that they're willing to pay for that. because of course that blue body operates at a fee. It'll take some fees from all these transactions. So, yeah, this is a little animation on how this would go. That's the thief, and this is the commercial arbitrator. I really love this clip. I'm going to play it again. Watch in slow motion. These are the stake tokens over here. Okay. So, final words are this, right? We must not confuse governance of a blockchain and their integrity of a blockchain with small disputes and frauds and things that happen to everybody all the time. These are two different things. If we mix this up together and try to make everything right, we'll screw up everything. Delegated proof of stake has sufficient voting mechanisms and sort of allows for the necessary intervention to govern a blockchain that is needed. This is like a very strong point I want to make. I don't think that any other blockchain protocol comes close to what DPoS actually allows for. And even if it's taken over by the Asians, and even if all the block producers all of a sudden become evil because, I don't know, they do too much drugs or something, they might damage the system temporarily. And the token value will go down temporarily. As the token value goes down, it will get bought up by someone else who will vote better block producers into the system and vote out the bad ones. And this process might take many years, like maybe 2 or 3 to settle down. But eventually, this framework actually is very powerful. There's a lot of wisdom that went into that, and I think it's trying to be like spilled along with the bathwater like a baby right now. And that's the last bit, that all the individual frauds cases and all the blah should be taken care of with free market, third-party multi-sig businesses that can instate really complex logic on top of that. And as Tokenica, we're actually working on a boilerplate smart contract that would accommodate these things, that would serve like a first example of how to do this. We're also in touch with a crew called Chestnut, that has won the 2nd prize in London Hackathon like a month back or so, which are sort of toying around with the same concept. So we'll probably be working together on this one with them. Okay, so any questions, fire away.